And good morning, everyone. Happy Wednesday morning to you. Welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. All right, as I promised you yesterday, we've obviously got to do a study of Acts 1, 9 to 11 in our examination of Matthew 25, 14 and following, and the parable of the absent master. Now, first of all, I want to remind you of how critical it is for understanding Acts 1 to see how the parables of Jesus serve as the controlling factor, the controlling narrative for understanding Acts chapter 1. In other words, in the parables, which were given obviously in Jesus' personal ministry, over and over and over again, Jesus spoke of his departure and his return. Okay, Acts 1 is his departure and his return. So the question is, did Jesus, in his parables, give a framework, a context, and a time for that return? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. So this morning, for brevity's sake, I'm only going to focus on a couple of those parables to show us how they determine how Jesus, number one, was preparing his apostles for his departure, and number two, setting the time, context, framework for his return. The very first of those parables that I want us to look at, and again, this is not going to be exhaustive for every parable that we could look at. Okay? Not at all. But what I want us to see is, and I'm only going to look at three parables today. One of them is admittedly does not mention the absent master per se. But guess what? Everybody admits that it is. In the very first of his major parables, in Matthew chapter 13, Jesus talks about the sower who went out to sow, sowed his seed. You had wheat, and you had the tares come up. And the servants asked the master, do you want us to gather up the tares first? And he said, no, let both grow up together until the time of the harvest. And at the time of the harvest, then first gather up the tares, burn them, then gather up the elect. Gather up the wheat. Gather them into the barn. Now, the disciples, in verse 36 and following, Jesus sent the multitude away, and the disciples came to Jesus asking him, Lord, why do you speak in parables? And Jesus said, let me explain this parable to you, because they asked him, explain to us the parable. Okay, now again, admittedly, it does not mention his departure. But I think anybody would agree, well, even though it doesn't mention the departure, if it mentions his coming, isn't the departure behind that? Antecedent to it? Okay, so for time consideration, I want to skip right down to verse 38. The one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world. The good seeds are the sons of the kingdom, but the tares are the sons of the wicked one. The enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age. Unfortunately, the King James and other translations render this the end of the world. No, 100 times no. It's not end of the world. It's end of the age. It's the end of the age. The apostles associated with the fall of Jerusalem in Matthew chapter 24 and verse 3. And no, they were not wrong. They were not confused. They were not ignorant. Get a copy of my book, Watching for the Parousia, where Jesus' apostles confused. It will blow your mind, ladies and gentlemen, at how clear the evidence is, Old Testament and New, that the apostles were absolutely correct to connect the fall of Jerusalem and the temple with the end of the age. They knew that, Commentators need to know that. Okay, so end of the age. Therefore, Matthew 13:40, as the tares are gathered and burned in the fire, so it will be at the end of this age. The Son of Man will send out his angels. They will gather out of his kingdom all things that offend, those who practice lawlessness, and will cast them into the furnace of fire. There shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth. Then when? At the end of the age. Then the righteous will shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Let the one who has ears to hear, let him hear. Now here's what you need to know. In verse 43, then the righteous will shine forth in the kingdom. That is a direct echo of Daniel chapter 12, verse 3, which is the time of the resurrection, Daniel 12, verse 2. Now watch this. Daniel chapter 12, the Great Tribulation, Daniel chapter 12, verse 1, that Jesus applied to his generation. Daniel chapter 12, verse 2, the time of the harvest, which is Matthew 13. More to say on that in just a moment. Number 3, Daniel chapter 12, verse 3, then shall the righteous shine forth as the stars in the firmament. Matthew 13, 43. Okay, so very clearly, Jesus is drawing from Daniel chapter 12. Daniel chapter 12, verse 4, said that was appointed until the time of the end. What's Jesus talking about? Oh, and by the way, the Greek in the Septuagint of Daniel chapter 12, it is suntelia, or suntilo, which is a form, a cognate, of the very term end of the age in Matthew chapter 13. It's the same time of the end. So Jesus talked about the coming of the Son of Man for the time of the harvest at the end of the age. Well, everybody admits that the return of the absent master, the coming of Christ, quote, in like manner, is at the end of the age, right? The time of the harvest, the time of the resurrection. Yeah, everybody agrees with that. Okay, Daniel chapter 12, verse 6. One angel asked another, when shall these things be? When shall all of these things be fulfilled? What things? Oh, great tribulation that Jesus said would be in the first century. Resurrection, which is Matthew 13. The righteous shining forth as the stars, Matthew 13. At the time of the end, which is Matthew 13 and Matthew chapter 24. So one angel asked another, when shall these things be? And the other angel holds up his right hand to heaven, his left hand to heaven, and swears by him who lives forever and ever, and says, it shall be for a time, times and a half time, and when the power of the holy people has been completely shattered, all of these things. Listen to me, ladies and gentlemen. He didn't say some of these things. He didn't say one of these things, or two, or three. He said, when the power of the holy people has been completely shattered, all of these things shall be fulfilled. I shared with you last week how Mr. Kyle Pope goes to Daniel chapter 12 and he says, well, verse 1, time of Antiochus Epiphanes. Verse 2, end of the world. So all of those things were not fulfilled, or not to be fulfilled at the same time. Ladies and gentlemen, that's taking Jehoiakim's penknife and just slashing and cutting and burning and destroying the text. So the question is, since God, through the angel of heaven, said all of these things would be fulfilled when the power of the holy people has been completely shattered, when was the power of the holy people completely shattered? And you know when that was. That was in AD 70. It was not in the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, because guess what? The covenant was not destroyed. The old covenant was not destroyed, negated, or nullified in the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. Thus, the attempt to apply Daniel chapter 12 to the time of Antiochus Epiphanes falls to the ground. Okay, got to hurry. The second passage, of the return of the absent master. Matthew chapter 21. You have a man who had a vineyard. A certain landowner who planted a vineyard, set a hedge around it, dug a wine press in it, built a tower, and he leased it to his vine dressers and went into a far country. Hey, that's Matthew 25:14, isn't it? Yeah, it is. And when the vintage time drew near, he sent his servants to the vine dressers that they might receive its fruit. And the vine dressers took his servants, beat one, killed one, stoned another. And again, he sent other servants, more than the first. They did likewise to them. Then last of all, he sent his son to them, saying, surely they will respect my son. But when the vine dressers saw the son, they said among themselves, this is the heir. Come, let us kill him, seize his inheritance. So they took him. They cast him out of the vineyard. They killed him. Therefore, Jesus said, when the owner of the vineyard comes, see, he left, he's going to come back. When the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do to those vine dressers? To the vine dressers who killed the son? They said to him, he will destroy those wicked men miserably and lease out his vineyard to the other vine dressers who will render to him the fruits in the season. Okay, what do we have? Vineyard. What was the vineyard of the Lord, ladies and gentlemen? According to Isaiah chapter 5, it was Israel herself. So here's the vineyard, time of the harvest, the persecution of the servants who were sent to gather the harvest, the killing of the son, and the coming of the master of the vineyard, who, by the words of the wicked husbandman, would utterly destroy them. Now watch. Jesus said to them, have you never read the scriptures? The stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. This is the Lord's doing, and it's marvelous in our eyes. Therefore I say to you, the kingdom of God will be taken from you and given to another nation, bringing forth the fruit thereof. And whosoever falls on this stone will be broken. On whoever it falls, it will grind to powder. Now when the chief priest and the Pharisees heard his parables, they perceived he was speaking of them. He wasn't speaking of the church at the end of time. He was speaking of them, those very Jewish leaders who were going to kill Jesus himself, the Son. And they were going to persecute his servants. And he would come. That's from a form of the Greek word erchomai, the common word for the second coming of Christ. Oh, you know, the return of the absent master. Okay, I'm out of time for this morning. In tomorrow's video, I'll look at one, perhaps two more parables of Jesus that give us direct insight into Jesus' interpretation, therefore, of Acts 1. So what have we seen today? Acts chapter 1, the return of the absent master. The return of the absent master in Acts 1 is the return of the Son of Man at the time of the harvest, at the end of the age, in fulfillment of Daniel chapter 12, which would be fulfilled at the time of the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70, the end of the Old Covenant. The return of the absent master in Matthew chapter 21, verse 33 and following, would be the return of the absent master at the time of the harvest, you know, of Matthew 13, when he would utterly destroy those who had killed his son. And the Jews understood he was talking about their destruction. If, therefore, the return of the absent master in Acts 1 is the return of the absent master of Matthew 13, And if it's the return of the absent master in Matthew 21, that means without any doubt whatsoever, the return of the absent master of Acts chapter 1 was in AD 70. And I'm out of time. I'll see you on the flip side.